a new American policy in the Middle East.
I am confident that the Lord is at work here.
Our exclusive interview with the Secretary of State.
I think they're anti-Jewish.
And the president lashes out as 2020 Democratic candidates skip out on the biggest pro-Israel policy conference in politics.
With Democrats gearing up for the next presidential election, we ask how peace and civility will prevail against a president who loves to pick a fight.
He's a whack job, there's no question about it.
Plus, a new documentary gives new life to the dignity of death. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
President Trump's declaration of Israeli sovereignty over disputed territory. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder.
The president took a wrecking ball to long-standing American policy in the Middle East.
That's right. President Trump declaring on Twitter it's time for the U.S. to, quote, fully recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights.
The announcement came as the president's Secretary of State sat down for an exclusive interview in the region with CBN News chief political analyst David Brody and Jerusalem bureau chief Chris Mitchell.
There he is. You doing well?
Walking firmly through the door, Mike Pompeo is a determined man. Both our Jerusalem bureau chief Chris Mitchell and I had the opportunity to interview the Secretary of State. It was part politics, part policy, and part spiritual, especially for a strong Christian who experienced a refreshing in the Holy Land.
The Western Wall, I was there with you. What was that experience like? I mean, how impactful was something like that?
This was incredibly special to be there with Israeli Prime Minister and the ambassador from the United States to Israel. Was really an important moment. It was special for me as a Christian, and it was special, I think, to show the commitment the United States has to this democracy, this Jewish nation of Israel.
President Trump showed that strong commitment again by announcing, through Twitter of course, that it's time for the U.S. to fully recognize Israel's sovereignty over the disputed Golan Heights. Music to the ears of the Israeli Prime Minister.
He did it again. First, he recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the U.S. embassy here. Then he pulled out of the disastrous Iran treaty and reimposed sanctions.
Netanyahu called it a Purim miracle as Jews around the world celebrate how God saved them through Esther from the evil Haman and the Persians. With modern-day Persians in Iraq threatening them now, and with President Trump boldly making moves in support of Israel, it begged for an obvious question.
Could it be that President Trump right now has been sort of raised for such a time as this, just like Queen Esther, to help save the Jewish people from an Iranian menace?
As a Christian, I certainly believe that's possible. It was remarkable. So we were down in the tunnels where we could see 3,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago, if I have the history just right, to see the remarkable history of the faith in this place and the work that our administration has done to make sure that this democracy in the Middle East of this Jewish state remains. I'm confident that the Lord is at work here.
But with all the benefits Israel has received from this administration, will there be a price to pay in the long-awaited Mideast peace plan?
What can you do to allay their fears of something like dividing Jerusalem in the upcoming peace plan?
So I've seen the details of the plan as it stands now. I'm sure there'll be things moved just a bit as time goes on. But evangelicals of the world should know that this is a vision for what might ultimately lead to this resolution of this conflict. And I think this plan presents a vision for that, but doesn't sacrifice any of these core principles, frankly, of any of the faiths.
As for the Jewish faith, attacks have been almost a way of life. Recently, anti-Semitism has seen a resurgence worldwide and even surfaced within the Democrat Party. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has come under fire for some of her remarks.
How concerned are you about the rise of not just anti-Semitism around the world, but in that Democrat Party as well?
To see this from a member of Congress like Congresswoman Omar to speak about anti-Semitism in that way is of great concern. It's great concern to me. This administration speaks the truth. And anti-Semitism is unacceptable in any form from anyone, but to see it come from one of America's leaders is just abhorrent.
Another concern, especially among many evangelicals, was President Trump's announcement to pull troops out of Syria, putting Christians and many others in the region as sitting ducks. Since then, the administration now says a military presence will remain, something the Secretary of State backed up in our conversation.
The challenges in Syria remain. The United States intends to remain. We are close to the destruction of the caliphate. It will be completed very, very soon.
This job is not for the faint of heart. But the good news, so to speak, is that Pompeo says he's rooted in the most important thing.
The task that I have is informed by my understanding of my faith, my belief in Jesus Christ as the Savior. It doesn't drive answers and outcomes every day. We all as Christians are searching, but it does inform how I try to treat every human being with dignity and respect in ways that Christians ought to. I don't always live up to that standard, but it does inform the way I think about the world.
Thanks, David, for that report. And joining us now is Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. Chris, thanks for being with us.
John, great to be with you.
Well, Chris, Secretary Pompeo's answer to your question about Queen Esther caught a lot of people's attention. What prompted you to make that comparison and ask for his response?
Well, actually, David and I collaborated on the questions, who was going to ask what, how we were going to ask them. And I had an original question, basically ending that with a question like, what are you going to do about Iran? But I think David actually shifted it in a little different direction, and I think that made it so provocative, and that fact that, could a President Trump, a flawed character, many would argue, be used by God to help save the Jewish people, just like Queen Esther? So we did ask that question, and Secretary of State said, as a Christian, it's a possibility. And I think it leaves open the question that God uses many people, whether people in high places or obscurity. I think he does that throughout the Bible. Many flawed characters in the Bible have been used by God for great, great works. Moses, King David, all had their own flaws, but God used them in critical times. Like many people would say, President Trump has been called, like Queen Esther, for such a time as this.
Chris, I want to dive deeper into that. Ari Lamb wrote a piece called The Secret Political History of Queen Esther. Basically, he highlights figures in history from Queen Elizabeth to Abraham Lincoln who have drawn from the story of Esther and Purim. In particular, he talked about how Abraham Lincoln sought the advice of an abolitionist preacher when he was debating when to declare the Emancipation Proclamation, and his response after hearing the comparison to Esther from this preacher was that whatever shall appear to be God's will, I will do. So I'm just curious about your response. I wonder if you would agree with Lamb's premise that specific figures throughout history have these moments in time that kind of shape the course of history.
That's true. They really have a choice to make, and Queen Esther had her choice to make, and Mordecai, her uncle, said, it's up to you, Queen. You can make a decision, but could it be that you were called for the kingdom for such a time as this? And I think that's a theme throughout the Bible, a theme throughout history. As you mentioned, Abraham Lincoln, he had his own choice to make. Would he emancipate the slaves at that time? I think people like Winston Churchill, he had a choice to make, to stand strong against Nazi Germany, Hitler's advance against the British Isles. Ronald Reagan made a choice. Actually, his speech there at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, and he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. All of his advisors in the State Department said, don't say that. He decided to make a decision. He said it soon thereafter the Berlin Wall fell. So I think that's a theme throughout history. Abraham Lincoln, Queen Esther, Ronald Reagan, people have their own choices to make, whether in great places or obscurity. We all have our choices to make day by day.
And Chris, real quick, I need to squeeze in this question. The Trump Mideast peace plan is expected to be unveiled sometime after the Israeli elections next month. Central to any proposal is the question of Jerusalem, a key city to all three Abrahamic faiths. So how do you think that will fit into Trump's soon-to-be unveiled plan?
Well, that's the big question, I think, for many evangelicals and Israelis. Will they divide the city of Jerusalem? It's a non-starter for evangelicals to divide the city that had been reunited 51 years ago now in 1967. I think that's going to be the key. People are going to be looking at it once this peace plan comes out, and we'll see what happens, hopefully sometime in April.
Well, Chris Mitchell from our Jerusalem Bureau, thank you so much for your insights. Well, the annual pro-Israel Aipac conference kicks off this weekend in D.C.
That's right. And while most years a lot of notable politicians from both sides of the aisle do go, this year there are quite a few snubs. Among them, a lot of the 2020 Democratic presidential candidates. We have Bernie Sanders, Beto O'Rourke, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, all of them saying they will not go this year.
And joining us now to talk a little bit more about this is our Capitol Hill correspondent, Abigail Robertson.
Abigail, what's the precedent here? Do presidents and politicians normally speak at this? It's pretty high profile.
Yes, this is really interesting because historically, AIPAC is seen as a must-stop for these candidates, especially those on the campaign trail. In 2008, both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton addressed the conference, and then they both addressed it again in their later elections in 2012 and 2016. So Democrat candidates and Republican candidates historically do attend this, and this year it's very interesting and notable that not one of the 2020 Democrat candidates will be there, and it's definitely something that's not going unnoticed by President Donald Trump, who is seizing this as an opportunity to paint them as anti-Jewish. Take a look at what he said today.
The Democrats have very much proven to be anti-Israel. There's no question about that, and it's a disgrace. I mean, I don't know what's happened to them, but they are totally anti-Israel. Frankly, I think they're anti-Jewish.
And while President Trump is not set to speak there this year, Vice President Mike Pence will be there representing the White House.
So, Abigail, what's the reasons that they're giving for not going this year?
Well, a big part of it is a liberal group started a petition on MoveOn.org, and on it they say, I'll read from the quote, any progressive vying to be the Democrat candidate for president should skip the AIPAC conference. Apparently they're taking that to heart. This appears to be one of the prime motivations they're not going to be there. Things have been, we've just been seeing some changes, I think, in the Democrat Party and their relationship to AIPAC and Israel and the historically pro-Israel stance. Now we're seeing different things come into the conversation that we haven't seen in years past, but historically Jewish people vote very strongly for Democrat candidates. So this is very interesting, and we'll see how this plays in 2020.
It is interesting to note the split because Democratic leadership will be there.
Oh, yes.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi will be there as well as Minority Leader Chuck Schumer
and Hakeem Jeffries. I mean, there will be Democrats attending, just not the 2020 candidates.
Interesting.
Abby, up on Capitol Hill, what kind of trends are you seeing in terms of lawmakers distancing themselves from groups like AIPAC?
Well, the Democrat Party had kind of split reactions on when Representative Ilhan Omar made her comments that Republicans very strongly condemned, but some Democrats weren't quick to condemn her, didn't know how to respond and react to that. And so we're seeing just a new conversation about this U.S. politicians' relationship with Israel and with groups like AIPAC, which is a strong pro-Israel lobbying group, and we're clearly seeing Congresswomen like Ilhan Omar make comments that claim that the support for Israel has been bought by groups like AIPAC. So there is this trend where now there's just a whole new conversation on the Hill. I think this is going to play a big part of the 2020 election cycle. These candidates are definitely going to be asked about this a lot on the campaign trail. I think that there are Jewish Democrats that are a little concerned with what they're seeing happening on the Hill, and if we're heading into just kind of uncharted territory here.
Well, this will be interesting to watch. Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, contradicting the U.S. Treasury Department, President Trump announced today that the administration is reversing additional large-scale sanctions on North Korea. The president announced the sanctions withdrawal on Twitter. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said in a statement that, quote, President Trump likes Chairman Kim, and he doesn't think the sanctions will be necessary.
Well, all territory held by the Islamic State in Syria has been, quote, 100% eliminated. According to the White House, the last ISIS stronghold in Baghouz, Syria, would end the ISIS caliphate. The president today said that it's, quote, about time for the fall of ISIS as the U.S. prepares to draw down troops in Syria and that region.
Well, today, 2 U.S. service members were killed in Afghanistan. According to a statement from the NATO-led international coalition in Kabul, they were killed while conducting an operation, and the incident is under investigation. Their deaths come as the U.S. and Taliban work towards a drawdown of international forces and an end to the war there spanning nearly 2 decades.
To the Russia investigation, the president wants the long-awaited special counsel report to be made public. It's expected any day now and should reveal whether or not his campaign conspired with Russia to win the 2016 election. Today, President Trump called the report more of the same.
It's just a continuation of the same witch hunt. They know it, and behind closed doors, they laugh at it. It's just a continuation of the same nonsense. Everybody knows. They ought to go to work, get infrastructure done, and get a lot of other things done.
The president added that any decision about the report's release will be up to Attorney General Bill Barr.
Well, the Federal Reserve announced this week it will hold interest rates steady, indicating no more hikes this year. The president saying last night in an interview the Fed's decision is not up to him.
And look, I hope I didn't influence, frankly, but it doesn't matter. I don't care if I influenced or not. One thing I was right, but we would have been over 4 if they didn't do all of the interest rate hikes. And they tightened. I mean, they did $50 billion a month. I said, what are we doing here? And so I'm not, 3.1 may be the best in 14 years. I'm not happy with it. We should have had much higher.
And today, the president announced the nomination of a longtime Trump supporter to the Federal Reserve Board. President Trump announced on Twitter that Stephen Moore of the Heritage Foundation and a regular here on CBN News will be considered for a seat on the Reserve's Board of Governors, adding that he has, quote, known Steve for a long time.
Well, some 2020 candidates are campaigning for peace and civility in politics. When we come back, how that will play out with a president who knows quite well how to pick a fight. Welcome back. Well, Dee Dee Bass-Wilbon is a communications specialist who assisted with the Ben Carson campaign back in 2016, and she joins us now to talk about civility, or the lack of civility, in today's politics. Dee Dee, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first question, what do you see that's driving bitterness and hate on both sides of the aisle? And then a follow-up, is it any better than it was back in 2016 when you were revising the Carson campaign?
Well, in the Ben Carson campaign, actually, Ben Carson's team hired our firm, Bass Public Affairs, to assist with his communications. And my sister, Dina Bass-Williams, she was actually on the campaign trail with Dr. Carson. And right now, in regards to civility, and I think people, if we're just, my mother always told, well, she continues to tell us, just be nice. And it's really easy to do that. I think sometimes we use more muscles in thinking about being mean and negative to someone, but if it's easy to be nice, it's easy to be civil and decent, and that's what we learned from Dr. Carson on the campaign. Regardless of the chaos, confusion, negativity, attacks on his personal or professional life, he always taught us just to respond in a nice, decent way, and he continues to teach us that now.
So that was inherent. That wasn't something that you had to build in him. That was something that he already had.
That was just who he is, and that's who he continues to be. And we continue to see that in his reactions throughout his confirmation and every day. He's just a really nice, decent person. And so that was very important for us, and we continue to see that all the time.
Many people, they like to point to President Trump and as someone who throws gasoline on the fire. And lately we've seen him talking about the late Senator John McCain. We have a clip of his latest comments about that. Let's go ahead and play that, and then, Dee Dee, we'll get your reaction.
He was horrible what he did with repeal and replace. It was what he did to the Republican Party and to the nation and to sick people that could have had great health care was not good. So I'm not a fan of John McCain, and that's fine.
And in that interview, the president goes on to say that he continues to talk about Senator McCain because reporters continue to ask him about the late Senator McCain. Dee Dee, what do you make of these comments?
They're two different people. Many people agree with everything President Donald Trump says. Other people, anything that he does is completely wrong. I disagree with the comments that he made about Senator John McCain. I think they were unwarranted. And I think that the president, there are a lot of other things that he could have talked about throughout this week that I personally would have loved to have heard him talk about in terms of his opportunity zones, the taxes, employment, protecting and keeping America safe, there's so many other topics that he could have discussed this week rather than attacking Senator John McCain. So I really disagree with those comments, and I really wish that the president would have focused and stay focused on the great things that he's done with this administration.
Yeah, missed opportunity.
Missed opportunity.
Real quick, if you were able to advise all the candidates in the 2020 campaign, what would be the advice that you would give them?
My advice to them would be to look at Dr. Ben Carson. Look at Dr. Ben Carson and how he responded and how he continues to respond to people on a daily basis. And to always, and also remember James 1:19, you know, in terms of scripture, to everyone to be easy to quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. If they could all do that, this next election, going to be perfect.
Look quite different.
Quite different.
Didi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, when we come back, one woman's courageous fight through suffering and pain, and why her life is being brought to the big screen.
Well, today marks the 5th anniversary of the death of Cara Tippets. She was no Hollywood darling or a household name, but she did make waves challenging a culture obsessed with the right to die.
Cara's brave battle with stage 4 cancer is captured in a new film that's out today, which aims to show the beauty of life through suffering and pain.
Jay and Sophia Lyons are partners at home and on the job. Based in LA, they run a production company and share Emmys for shows like MTV's Made and TLC's My 600-Pound Life.
I don't think she's going to live much longer.
Their latest project, A Sharp Departure, a show that reflects their Christian faith and examines dealing with death.
Which sounds really morbid.
But for Jay and Sophia, the topic can also be healthy and constructive.
It's a moment of truth and clarity for a Christian, and especially the way that the Christian community handles dying and death is a beautiful thing.
His idea turned into reality when he saw a Facebook post about a pastor's wife who needed prayer. Her name? Cara Tippets.
Hi. I'm Cara Tippets.
She and her family, including 4 young kids, had just moved to Colorado to plant a church when doctors gave her a fatal diagnosis, stage 4 breast cancer.
Cara's blog took readers on a journey that captured her warmth, her compassion, and heart to share the gospel with others.
She was funny.
She was enthusiastic. She was a visionary. She had huge ideas and loved casting a vision, and her house was full of people.
She had big ideas, and she was confident, but she was very humble, and she was a sincere Christ follower.
By allowing the Lyons to film her final moments, Cara shared her suffering with her friends, family, and legion of readers. Her following only grew after writing an open letter responding to another young cancer patient who publicly announced her right to die with dignity.
She did not intend for this to become some huge political storm.
I mean, it blew up.
Some saw it as a direct attack on the dying patient, but Sophia says those who did missed Cara's true heart.
She was sad because the whole point was just for her to reach out to this person, and she knew...
In love, and she did reach out in love.
She did, and so I think she was sad that her point wasn't received in the way it was intended.
But now people can know her heart and will learn other valuable life lessons in the new documentary, The Long Goodbye.
It was the most sobering, sad moment of her life.
Combining professional and personal videos, the film paints an intimate portrait of a life cut short, but well lived.
I feel like I'm a little girl at a party whose dad's asking her to leave early, and I'm throwing a fit. I'm not afraid of dying. I just don't want to go.
The project taught Jay and Sophia the extent of Cara's influence, reaching people like best-selling Christian author Ann Voskamp, Johnny Erickson Tata, and even former HGTV Fixer-Upper host Joanna Gaines.
It's amazing the impact she's had on so many people's lives.
While certainly sad, the producers believe viewers watching Cara's story will walk away with hope.
I know that sounds like a weird thing to say about a movie about someone who suffers, but it is hopeful, and that was the goal of this movie, is to make it be hopeful, to learn, even though this woman, we watch her suffer and die, but you learn how to live.
It's a beautiful experience if you can set your fear aside, if you have a fear of dying, for you to see this woman who's excited about meeting Jesus.
The world says I should be angry, that I should be shaking my fist at God, but I want to be able to share this story that suffering isn't a mistake and it isn't the absence of God's goodness, because he's present in pain.
Cara's life and message still powerful today and reaching many more through this film in the future. John Jessup, CBN News.
And Cara's story was incredibly moving. If you want to spend time to just kind of be able to appreciate life, I recommend people look at her blog. It's just so moving.
So inspiring. What a story. What a life.
That's right. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great weekend.